Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Ricky Robertson on supporting educator resilience during shelter in place. First off, we at Corwin wish health and well-being to all of you and your families and your communities in times of uncertainty. Experience has taught us that one of the best ways to combat isolation is to remain connected. So we're very happy that you took the time to join us today for some professional development. It's really appreciated. Now what I'd like to do is turn the presentation over to Charlene Maher from Corwin to introduce today's presenter.
Thanks, Jeff. And thank you everybody for joining us today. It is my pleasure to introduce Ricky Robertson. He is a full-time Corwin consultant, as well as the author of our best-selling book, Building Resilience in Students Impacted by Adverse Childhood Experiences, with his co-authors, Victoria Romero and Amber Warner. As a consultant and coach, Ricky assists schools in developing trauma-informed systems of support and restorative practices that foster resilience and success for staff and students. And so today he'll be talking to us about building educator resiliency during shelter in place. With that, I'd like to turn this over to Ricky.
All right, thank you everyone for joining me this afternoon. I hope you are well. I'm going to see if I can start my video. I'm not sure why I can't. So with that, I'm gonna see what I can do. Okay, so with that, we're gonna be spending our time together this afternoon talking about ways to foster educator resilience during shelter in place. I'm gonna invite folks to, if you can, go ahead and grab a piece of paper and something to write with. It will help you during this time. If everyone would also please turn their microphones on mute. And you can also turn your cameras off during this time, because those things will help us to save bandwidth. We have, I think, over 1,000 participants currently on, and a couple thousand folks who registered for today's webinar because it's such an important topic. So with that, we'll go ahead and begin, and I'll start just by introducing myself. I'm the co-author of the book, Building Resilience in Students Impacted by Adverse Childhood Experiences, a whole staff approach. I wrote that book along with Victoria Romero, who is a retired school principal and national consultant, and Amber Warner, who is a licensed clinical social worker. And so these things, we came together to provide a lens around trauma and social emotional supports for students that integrates the perspective of myself as an educator, Victoria as an administrator, and Amber as a licensed clinical social worker. So with that, I just want to mention in terms of interaction today, because we do have so many participants, any questions that you have, I'll give you an opportunity at the end of the presentation to ask any questions, and I'll have some questions, some simple questions for folks that they can type into the chat box. So with that, I hope that we are ready to get started, and I recommend, if you can, to just grab a pen and paper. So I'd like us to just briefly check in with right now kind of where we're at, what we're feeling right now. So if you could just please take a moment to take a deep breath. For some of us, we're right in the middle of our day. For some of us, we're approaching the end of our day. I'm here in San Francisco, where I've been sheltering in place for over 30 days at this point. And so let's just take a moment to see how we're feeling right now. And if you would, please type one word into the chat box at this time. So you should be able to hear me and see the PowerPoint. I'm seeing folks say exhausted, overwhelmed, stressed, blessed, anxious, hopeful, isolated, productive, tired, optimistic, stressed, frustrated, grateful, thankful, confined, wary, bored, rested, confused, disappointed, tired, surviving, sad, uncertain, motivated, grief-stricken, peaceful, overwhelmed, off-center. So I just want to make space that all of these emotions are completely natural, appropriate responses to the different things that are happening during this time. And I want to make space for them and think about how we can support ourselves so that we can then take care of our students and take care of others during this time. So with that, if you have a piece of paper, something to write with handy, it would be helpful. But we're going to just do a brief activity that kind of speaks to some of the things we might be feeling right now. And so if you have a pen and paper and you want to participate, otherwise you can just kind of think along with me as we do this, draw 2 circles on that sheet of paper. And I'm going to do the same thing right now. And in that inner circle, we're going to put a list of things that are outside of our influence or control. So these are things that we cannot control, we cannot directly influence completely. And we're going to write down some of the things that are stressing us right now that we don't have control over. And so if you'd like, you can even mention some of those things in the chat box, or what are some things you would put in that inner circle that you don't have immediate control or influence over. Students' access to Wi-Fi, COVID-19, the weather, school being closed, the pandemic, death, grief, loss, access to supplies, job insecurity, food for children, student motivation, student safety, separation, misinformation, being with our family that we're separated from, grief, financial uncertainty, teacher tech knowledge, the needs of the families that we serve, a lack of planning, work demands, length of this isolation, parental stress, state testing, uncertainty about the future in terms of what that holds for us and our children, student stress. So you may have put things like COVID-19, the pandemic, students not having access to internet. Some of us might be concerned about the home lives of our students, especially our students who are impacted by adverse childhood experiences and childhood trauma. And as we kind of put these things in the circle, we recognize we can't control them, but that doesn't mean they aren't going to weigh heavy on our minds. It doesn't mean that they aren't going to contribute to a sense of anxiety. And so with that, we want to now turn our focus to what is it that we can do? What are the things that we can do when we're faced with these challenges that we don't have any immediate control or influence over? And so what I'd like you to do is on the outer circle, what are some of the things you can influence right now? What are some of the responses you can take, some of the actions you can take to respond to some of those concerns we just listed? Expressing care, self-care, self-regulation, being available to my students, my attitude, flexibility, prayer, communication, calling families to offer support. I'm just reading things folks are saying on the chat box. Mindful breathing, connecting with teachers and administrators, relying on my faith, how I respond to these, setting boundaries, my happiness, taking care of myself during this time, doing my best, setting a schedule, creating a routine, being thankful, yoga, preparation, what we eat, being mindful. So we may have entered things like taking precautions to protect myself and other people, whether it's social distancing or washing our hands or taking care of our well-being, how much we care for our students, the efforts that we make to support our students and our families during this time. and how we take care of ourselves. These are just a few of the many responses that could go into that circle, that outer circle. And one of the most important things is that when we feel uncertain, when we feel like something is beyond our control, it causes us stress. And it is helpful to then focus on, what are the things I can do in this moment? Even if it's just taking a pause, taking a deep breath, being kind to ourselves, reaching out to a family member, reaching out to our students, even if it's just some small act, being able to face crisis and uncertainty, but feel a sense of agency, feel a sense of some personal power, some hope in those moments is so critical. And that comes from our ability to focus on the things that we can do in those moments, the ways that we can be kind and gentle to ourselves and one another in those moments of stress, anxiety, and uncertainty. And the one small action we can begin to take in a direction that will help us grow, or will help the situation, or will contribute to people who we care about. And so I just invite you in those moments of anxiety and those moments of overwhelm, pause and think, am I focusing on something that is outside of my control? And if so, what can I do right now to pause, to be mindful? And is there anything I can do, even in some small way, to help myself or others during this time? And bringing our attention and our focus to what we can do. I'm going to share a video with you from Dr. Kristen Neff, and it's just a brief video that offers some advice about what we can do in those moments when we're feeling that stress and that anxiety and that overwhelm. Or if you're anything like me, I also am really sheltering in place with me and my inner critic. Unfortunately, even in the midst of this, I still grapple with being kind to myself and letting myself learn and make mistakes, because this is a new situation, but I have a very strong habit energy around being perfectionistic or being my own worst enemy, so to speak. And so with that, Kristen Neff offers us some good suggestions on ways to start with practicing self-compassion.
What is self-compassion? I think it's usually easier for people to understand what self-compassion is if they think of what it feels like to have compassion for others, which is more familiar. So let's say you've got a good friend who you're very close to, and she tells you something that's gone wrong in her life, or maybe she's made some big mistake, blown it on a work assignment. So if you have compassion for your friend, the first thing is you're tuned into her suffering. I mean, maybe your friend doesn't even say she's upset, but you just notice the way she looks, and you say, oh, what's wrong? Tell me about it. So you've got to notice that she's suffering first. And then in response to that suffering, you have to be kind, caring, supportive, try to comfort your friend, soothe her, let her know that it's okay, let her know that you still care. And then finally, it's important to remember that suffering is part of the human experience. You might say to your friend, oh, it's only human, it happens to all of us. It's an experience that we all share, so your friend doesn't feel isolated in her suffering. So compassion really involves three basic components: noticing suffering, being kind and caring in response to that suffering, and remembering that imperfection is part of the human experience, something we all share.
And is this the same for self-compassion then?
Exactly the same. So with self-compassion, the most important step actually is to notice your own suffering. And a lot of people say, well, isn't that blindingly obvious? But in fact, it's not. Especially when your suffering comes from your own self-judgment and self-criticism. Some of our worst pain is when, we look in the mirror and you notice you gained 10 pounds. Well, that is a real moment of suffering that's worthy and deserving of a compassionate, caring, comforting response. But most of us don't do that. We just keep on beating ourselves up. Or let's say something happens like your child gets sick. Most of us go straight into problem-solving mode. What do I have to do? Who do I have to call? And you forget to say, wow, this is really difficult. This is really stressful. I need some soothing and comforting. Most people forget that they need to give that to themselves. So again, with self-compassion, it's noticing that you're suffering, but it's being kind in the face of that suffering, saying, oh, this is really hard, poor thing, this is stressful, this is difficult, or it's really hard to feel inadequate or ashamed about something. Just being really open-hearted toward yourself. And then finally, it's so important remembering that suffering and imperfection is part of the shared human experience. I mean, where's that contract you signed before you came into this world saying you would be perfect and life would be perfect? And yet most of us, when something goes wrong, either in ourselves and our lives, we say, hey, this isn't supposed to be happening. But in fact, it is supposed to be happening. It's part of the experience. It's okay. So self-compassion involves remembering when things go wrong, when you make mistakes, that you need to be kind and caring and supportive towards yourself. And the great thing about self-compassion is that you're always there. You're there 24/7 to give you help when you need it most.
So when we practice self-compassion, there are 3 steps. The first is just pausing and noticing our suffering and responding to it with kindness. So just noticing, wow, I'm worried about my family right now. I'm worried about the spread of this pandemic. I'm worried about my job, and just noticing that that is stressful, that that is painful, that that is a type of suffering, and responding to ourselves with that kindness. Then the second step is pausing and noticing, wow, there are many people who are sharing in my suffering right now, who are also feeling similar things to what I'm feeling, even though they may be like me or very different from me, but we're sharing, we have something in common in our experience of this suffering, that common humanity. It is not unique to me, and it is not a failure of mine that I am feeling this way. And then the third step is just being mindful, just sitting with it and approaching with a sense of curiosity and acceptance. So noticing, where am I feeling this stress right now in my body? What would I call this emotion? Just breathing deeply. I'm feeling my shoulders tense. Let me relax them. I'm noticing there's tightness in my jaw. Let me just take a deep breath and relax, and just being with our experience mindfully. I have been using this strategy to kind of interrupt my inner critic during this time, to interrupt my catastrophe thinking. I've been practicing self-compassion, those 3 steps, for just a minute or 2. I'll just pause, take a breath, notice what I'm feeling, remind myself that others are experiencing it as well, and just sit for a few minutes and take a few deep breaths, just being mindful with my experience. And even just practicing it for a minute or 2 has helped to interrupt some of those anxiety thoughts, those inner critic thoughts, those perfectionistic thoughts, those catastrophe thoughts, and just remind myself of where I am in the present moment. Some other of Dr. Kristen Neff's self-compassion strategies include talking to yourself as you would a friend. So just noticing our self-talk and being supportive. Even one strategy she recommends, and there are more on her website, is writing yourself a note or a letter as though you're a supportive friend, like you're writing to yourself, encouraging yourself. But journaling in general is shown to be a helpful strategy for supporting our mental health and resilience. And another self-compassion strategy is just looking for things that feel soothing or comforting. So if it's a soft blanket, if it's yoga, if it's stretching, taking deep breaths, but just things that comfort the body, drinking some tea or a hot beverage that naturally calm the body without us even having to think about it. Those are some of the self-compassion strategies. I'm going to mention this now, and I will mention it again at the end of the webinar. I've made a list of all of the additional websites and resources I'm going to be referencing to support educator resilience. And I put them all in a Google Doc, and I've pinned them as a tweet on my Twitter account, Teach4Trust. That's teach the number 4 trust. And even if you do not have Twitter, if you search for my name, you can still access that link to the Google Doc that will have all of the resources I mentioned, including Dr. Kristen Neff's website and self-compassion strategies. But I encourage you, even if it's just for a minute or 2, to just try those 3 steps of self-kindness, recognizing the shared suffering that we share with others, and then just being mindful and gentle and noticing our experience in that moment without judging it. We're now going to talk about ways to develop self-care plans. So the inner critic, by the way, I saw a question, is my way of talking about that self-critical voice that sometimes I have, those thoughts that push me towards perfectionism or things like that. And so I call that my inner critic. Everyone might have a different name for it. Some folks might not even have a very strong experience of that, but I personally do. I definitely have a tendency to be kind of my own worst critic or very perfectionistic, and self-compassion helps to soothe that and quiet that voice. So we're now going to talk about self-care strategies. So self-compassion is a great kind of in-the-moment strategy, and it can be part of our daily self-care. And one of the things that's critical right now during COVID-19, during shelter in place, is that we try to make self-care a daily routine. We look for ways to incorporate it into our day-to-day practices. And I want to talk a little bit about what self-care is before I highlight some of the things that are really important during shelter in place to consider for our well-being. One is that self-care has many different aspects. So it's both physical, emotional, psychological, can be spiritual, financial. And here we have an image of a self-care wheel. This is a type of image. There are many versions of this. It just has some suggestions for things to do if you want to build some self-care in one of those domains, if it's emotional or if it has to do with your physical well-being, etc. And let's talk a little bit about what self-care is and what self-care isn't. And I want to offer you some suggestions I have when we think about creating a self-care plan during this time. So one of the things that happens to me when folks ask me about self-care is I often start to think of the things I wish I did to take care of myself. So for example, if I'm stressed and someone says, well, what can you do to practice self-care? I have a tendency to think of things like I might say, I'm going to meditate for an hour a day, or I'm going to work out every day, or I'm going to give up sugar. And these are all healthy things, but realistically, if you know me, they're not going to happen anytime soon. And so sometimes I create a self-care list that has a lot of things I aspire to, but maybe I can only maintain them for a week or two. And then all of a sudden, I start eating the sugar, or for me, it's dark chocolate peanut butter cups. Those are my favorite. Or I miss exercising that day. And all of a sudden, I don't know if you have this experience, but my self-care list actually becomes a way that I start to judge myself for not fulfilling on these additional responsibilities. And so right away, one of the things I want us to keep in mind is that I want us to create self-care plans that we could accomplish on one of our roughest days. In other words, plans that have simple things that are helpful for us. So for me, I love certain music. I've been listening to a lot of Leon Bridges lately. I have a friend who I can call even when I'm at my lowest point, and she reminds me of my strength. I have a book that I love to read, even if it's just small excerpts from, or even just to hold it. But these are simple things I can do even on my toughest day. And then my self-care plan also has things that I aspire to, like exercising for a brief period of time each day, meditating each day, but I'm flexible about those so that I don't judge myself. I make a self-care plan for what could I do on one of my toughest days. The other key point I want to point out when we think about self-care is that sometimes when we think about self-care, we think about binging on our favorite Netflix show, or having a glass or a bottle of wine when we come home, or a pint of Ben and Jerry's, or like we think about self-care as a way to comfort ourselves. Before we went into shelter in place, it might have been getting a mani-pedi or going to a sporting event or things like that. And what I want to acknowledge is that having our favorite foods, watching our Netflix shows, etc., these are things that help with pain relief. In other words, they alleviate stress and they're soothing, and that's good. However, they don't fundamentally change the things that are causing us stress or the tools we have to respond to those stressors. So for example, I can take the hot bath or watch my shows on Netflix or have that glass of wine, but the reality is that when I'm done, the things causing me stress are still going to be there. And so we need to balance our self-care with some of the things that soothe our pain. So have your favorite foods, watch your Netflix show, etc., but also include some things that help to build your resilience, that help to change either the circumstances that are causing you that stress or change the way you respond to that stress. So some of the things that help to build our resilience are rest. I can't stress that enough. We live in a very consumerist society, but rest, it's not very sexy. You can't sell it, but it's one of the most important things for our mental health and our bodies. Having a healthy diet, boundaries around how much media we're taking in, boundaries around work. Yesterday, I was doing a webinar with administrators, and I said to them, right now, teachers are overwhelmed by the amount of communication they're receiving about work. Imagine taking all the communication that occurs during a school day and converting it to emails and text messages. It is too much. So I said, here are your 3 rules right now. And I was talking with these administrators. All communication around school needs to be able to be clear. In other words, here's what I'm communicating, here's the objective, here's the task. It needs to be concise, and it needs to be connected. In other words, you got to check in. You're talking to another human being on the end of the line, so to speak, and sometimes we can forget that when we're communicating so much virtually. And so one of the things to keep in mind is we got to ask folks, how are you doing? Or I hope you're well. And so we keep our communication connected, clear, and concise, because otherwise it's too much. And also putting boundaries around our workday, because the thing I'm running into is I can let myself work all day, all night, because there's no technical end of the day, end of the workday anymore. And so we have to pick a time when we are going to set aside the phone, set aside the email, and not focus on work during that time. And the important thing to do is sometimes, I know this about myself, I'm addicted to yes. In other words, even though I'm telling you I'm going to set aside my phone, set aside my emails, I'll be the first one to betray that promise to myself. Because I'll get hooked. I'll end up in a conversation around work or sending late emails. And the thing to do in that moment is to pause, be kind to myself, and put it away. And reaffirm that boundary. Because the thing about boundaries is we learn them. We have to practice with them. We're not always immediately good at maintaining them perfectly. So we give ourselves some grace, but we set those boundaries around work. And that clear, concise, connected communication. Other things that help us to build resilience are having some tough conversations around when we need support, asking for help, saying no. Also making a list where we prioritize and put first things first. Because right now there are so many competing priorities that we have to prioritize what is most essential right now in my instruction, in the things that my schools are doing, etc. And so having a list of priorities is critical. If you're a school administrator watching this, please consider sitting down and having a conversation with some of your staff and coming up with a list of even 4 to 5 priorities for my school right now during shelter in place and distance learning, so that way your staff knows everyone is on the same page, we have the same priorities. And your first priority is we take care of ourselves and one another. And then that second priority is we connect with our students and our families. And then we can look at our priorities around instruction or literacy or making sure families' needs are met. But we start with what are the priorities for our school during this time so that we know we are in this together and we are on the same page. No more than 3 to 5 for these are our priorities, because you have to treat this experience like it is the start of the school year. Even if you're teaching online, if you are working with students, you have to pretend that this is the beginning of the school year, reviewing your expectations, reviewing the opportunities for them to reach out and connect with you for support, etc. You have to treat this like the beginning of the year at the school level as well as at the classroom level. Supportive relationships, spiritual or religious communities, are helpful for many people. Recovery communities, 12-step meetings, also other forms of self-care like therapy and attending getting medical care if you need it. And then there are some things that both alleviate pain and build our resilience. Things like rest, mindfulness, meditation, exercise, journaling, artistic expression. Those are things that naturally alleviate stress, but can also shift our mindset, change the way we respond to stress, change some of the circumstances causing that stress. So I just want to share those perspectives. One, I'm going to review them. Create a self-care plan that you can do on one of your toughest days. Self-care should never be a reason to judge yourself. 2, create a self-care plan that balances things that alleviate stress with things that actually build your resilience and change the way you respond to stress or change the circumstances that are causing you that stress. So let's take a moment right now, and I want to review 3 critical aspects of self-care during shelter in place. So you're welcome to draw, if you have paper and pen, a self-care grid or a wheel. And if you get any ideas during today's webinar, write them down. I'm encouraging you to write them down because when we're under stress, our mind very often does not go to the healthiest decision to make. In other words, if I'm under stress, I don't go to, I should take deep breaths and pause. My mind goes to, where did I leave the Oreos? I bought some double stuffed Oreos the other day. Where are they? That's where my mind goes when I'm under stress. It does not go to let me pause, let me take a deep breath, let me practice some self-compassion. And so to help with that, we've got to write it down and keep it someplace visible. So if you get any ideas around self-care during our conversation in the next few minutes, please write them down or write down a self-care plan after our webinar. Again, there will be more resources posted on the Google Doc that's on my Twitter at Teach for Trust. So there are 3 key areas of self-care we really need to think about during shelter in place. And then one that I added. The first one is, what can we do each day to take care of our physical well-being? And I welcome folks, if there's some things that they're doing, type them in the chat box, because if folks need some ideas or something new to try, they're going to get those ideas from you. So take a walk, setting a reminder on my phone to practice self-care, dancing, walking my dog, hiking, Zumba, exercise, taking a walk, taking a nap, stretching, watching different, having different fitness apps or videos, Pilates, riding a bike, drawing, gardening, eating 3 meals a day, just keeping a routine, that's very helpful. Cleaning and organizing, okay. Eating vegetables, exercise, getting in that cardio, anything for your physical well-being. Playing games with your kids, doing yoga, lots of hugs if you're not living alone, intentional deep breathing, hot bath, etc. So prayer, playing with pets, yoga nidra, excellent. Alternate nostril breathing, virtual game nights. So thinking about things that take care of our physical well-being, that means getting our body moving at different points in the day, making sure that we're stretching, making sure we're getting fresh air, making sure we're eating well, drinking water, just things that help with our physical well-being. And now my next question, because I talked about 3 key components, the next one is, what are some ways that are helping with your mental and emotional well-being right now? So maybe these are some strategies you have for handling stress. Music, naps, painting, calling a friend, prayer, reading, meditation, singing, video games, creating art, journaling, connecting with friends, housemates, family members, gardening, planting, having some alone time, knitting, Zoom chats, gratitude, praise and worshiping, devotionals, spending time with pets, redesigning a room, Sitting out in the fresh air, that can absolutely help your mental and emotional well-being. Being in nature, even if it's just for a little while, 20-minute walk, or just going outside for 20 minutes. Tapping, EFT, great. Texting siblings, adequate sleep, a no news time, setting boundaries around the news. Excellent. So we've looked at supporting physical well-being, supporting mental and emotional well-being, which includes ways to handle stress. And then the last kind of critical area that's important, that's specific to when we're sheltering in place, is also what are we doing to stay socially connected? So what are some of the things that you're doing right now to stay connected with people you care about? Virtual happy hours, Zoom, phone calls, Animal Crossing, email, text messages, writing letters to family, sharing updates, FaceTime, seeing people but with social distancing, at least 6 feet apart, if not more, writing to ICE detainees, watching different Netflix shows with friends, virtual scavenger hunt, online social emotional chats, quarantine pen pals, WhatsApp groups chats, online house party, chess game by email, wow. Attending webinars like these, good. So one of the things that I wanna encourage folks to think about when they're thinking about staying socially connected, just keep this in mind. Think about the quantity. In other words, how much am I reaching out to folks, making sure you're reaching out to someone every day, but then also think about the quality of those connections. So look for opportunities, not just to talk about the quarantine and the pandemic and COVID-19, but also to share happy memories, funny stories, just enjoying each other's company. Those Netflix parties or those online craft circles or different things that just help us to actually have some fun, to laugh, to not just focus on kind of the shared experience of stress right now that we're having, but actually just the quality of the connection, taking a moment to enjoy talking to the other person and sharing some things that are fun or exciting. Online book clubs, I love that, theme nights, etc. Volunteering if possible. Also, you know, making donations right now. There's incredible organizations like Feeding America that are doing a lot right now to support families and folks in need. So the last one that I'm going to throw up before we move on to other topics around resilience is just something you can do for fun. And a lot of people have already touched on a number of those things, but that's the one that I add because it's important to take care of our physical well-being. It's important to take care of our social emotional. It's also important to take care of our, to staying socially connected. And then again, adding some fun, building Lego sets, family games. I've started learning Spanish. Estoy aprendiendo español. Sorry about how awful the pronunciation was just there, but I've been taking online Spanish lessons for fun. Qué bueno, gracias. So making TikToks with my teens. Thanks folks for supporting the Spanish. DIY projects, baking, yes, puzzles, playing guitar, learning an instrument, dancing, talking to birds and feeding them, funny stories, playing the piano. Excellent. So just thinking about things that we do right now to keep things lighthearted, keep things fun, learning sign language, setting up a hammock, science experiments. I see a lot of folks learning new languages. That's awesome. Trashy novels, exactly. This is a time to also indulge in some of those things we enjoy. Building a table at home, excellent. All right, flying a kite. So thinking about different ways to be creative, imaginative. When we practice art, even if it's coloring, if it's journaling, one of the great things is that within 5 to 15 minutes, the central nervous system naturally. One of the things that's great about creating art is that the central nervous system within 5 to 15 minutes naturally starts to calm down. So we don't even have to think about calming our bodies. When we make art or do something like crafts, the body will naturally calm itself. So that artistic self-expression is so important right now. It's also a great strategy to use with students and incorporate into your instruction or the packets you're sending home. So we're now going to move on to some strategies related to what I call, or not what I call, it's the work of Dr. Brian Sexton. My co-author Amber introduced me to his work around bite-sized resilience. So as we move into those strategies and the research behind that, I want to just conclude the conversation around self-care, encouraging you to complete your self-care plan, come up with some of those routines and ideas, and remember that self-care is never a selfish act. It is simply good stewardship of the only gift I have, the gift I was put on earth to offer others. Anytime we can listen to true self and give the care it requires, we do it not only for ourselves, but for the many others whose lives we touch. Parker J. Palmer. So keep in mind as you practice self-care, it is never a selfish act. You are simply a steward of the gift you have to offer others. And so with that, I want to then explore some strategies that can work in the moment when we're feeling some stress, some anxiety, and we need some things that help to lift our natural resilience and our mood. This comes out of the research of Dr. Brian Sexton, who works at Duke University, and most of his research is on healthcare providers, but it also applies to educators because we also work in high stress fields. And Dr. Brian Sexton and his colleagues research what are some of the things that help to increase our resilience in the moment when we are under stress. And they came up with a list of some strategies that they've done a tremendous amount of research on. And they include things like humor, affirmations and quotes, storytelling, active listening. These are some of the things we actually just spoke about, but also some strategies like 3 good things, you at your best, signature strengths. I'm going to talk about a couple of them specifically. So 3 good things. 3 good things is something that Dr. Brian Sexton researched with a few thousand nurses, I believe. At this point, his research looked at what is a strategy that can help, especially folks in high stress fields. And 3 good things is writing down 3 good things and your role in them for 15 consecutive days. And he found that nurses who had high levels of depression and burnout had only moderate to low levels of depression and burnout after completing this activity. Nurses who had moderate and low levels of burnout and depression when they started had little or no symptoms for up to 6 months after completing the intervention. And so again, it's writing down 3 good things and your role in them for 15 consecutive days. So simple, and yet had a positive impact on mood up to 6 months after they completed the intervention. That's more effective than Prozac, right? Because we quit taking an antidepressant and within a few days, the symptoms often come back. But with 3 good things, the effect lasted up to 6 months after completing it. So at the end of each day, preferably 2 hours before bed, reflect on your day and write down 3 good things. Can be just 1 sentence each, and your role in them. So I paused to admire the sunset, or I helped a student with a math problem, or I did something kind for my spouse, etc. But just 3 good things and your role in them. And then the next piece is we do that for 15 consecutive days. So it's not a gratitude journal. We don't do it forever. We do it for 15 days. Because if we keep doing it, it loses its impact over time. And so I invite you to do that this evening. Set a reminder with your phone. Maybe you can do it with colleagues or as a family. But for the next 15 days, write down 3 good things and your role in them. And if you do it within 2 hours before bed, research also showed it helped to improve sleep quality. And absolutely, writing it out is much more powerful than typing it. And just, it can be very brief, but 3 good things and your role in them for 15 consecutive days. The other strategy that I want to share from Dr. Sexton's bite-sized resilience research is called signature strengths. And this website, I have the link on the Google Doc on my Twitter, that's pinned on my Twitter account. And it is a survey that you take, and it then identifies your top personality character strengths. And what's wonderful about this is we know from research that if you try to think of just one thing each day that you can do that's connected to one of your strengths. So example, I took it, and my top strengths are humor, creativity, kindness, courage, and perspective. And so just doing one thing each day that connects to one of my signature strengths has been shown to alleviate stress, improve our mood, and improve the quality of our relationships. So I invite you, if you have some time, take the survey, identify your key strengths, and think about ones that you enjoy living out of, that bring you happiness. And then do something once each day that connects to one of those strengths. There's also a version of this that can be shared with our students. They have a youth survey that's for students ages 10 to 17. They ask that students under the age of 13 have a parent help them with the survey, but the youth survey version is available on the website as well. And we can share that with our students, and it's absolutely something that would help to benefit them, their mood, their sense of hope for the future. I wish it's a survey that I had taken as a senior in high school, to be honest, because it would be helping me to think about careers that connect to my key strengths. And it is free. There is no cost. Everything I'm sharing today are free resources that you can find. I'm an educator, so I know what I'm looking for when I'm looking for resources. And so I absolutely have there's a question, do I have any articles or readings for ways to support students? It's as though you read my mind. So we're going to close today's webinar with talking about some ways to support students right now. I've been working virtually with different schools and districts over the past few weeks, providing online webinars and virtual interactive trainings with staff on ways to support educator resilience and also ways to support student resilience. I say that because what I'm about to talk about is just the tip of the iceberg. It's not a complete set of recommendations, etc. It's just some best practices to support our students, because I recognize that part of our well-being comes from knowing that we are living into our purpose, that we are doing the work we are called to do, and that we are supporting our students. So one of the key things to keep in mind as always when supporting students is Maslow before Bloom, right? Students and families, we have to help to address those core needs right now for whether it's partnering with nonprofits to provide food with families, or we're delivering meals, providing a sense of safety, providing a sense of relationships and connections. Those are our first priorities right now. And then helping young people to feel a sense of agency, of possibility. And then finally, when we have at least some of those needs met when we have those needs met to at least some degree, then students are able to engage in self-actualization or learning, or Bloom's revised taxonomy. In other words, students can create and evaluate and analyze once we have first met those fundamental needs for safety, belonging, and connection. And so that has to be our first priority in this. And so let's just talk about some research around best practices to support young people. And this comes from research on supporting young people through challenging times like natural disasters, pandemics, different forms of crisis. And so one of the most important things we do first and foremost to cultivate student resilience right now is we make sure we're connecting with them. If it's mailing postcards, mailing packets, texting through apps like Remind, or sending emails or Zoom, we're connecting with them regularly right now. That is the first most critical piece. Then the next piece has to do with talking with students and also with families around setting some appropriate boundaries around how much we're thinking about and being exposed to COVID-19. Some of our students aren't very tuned in to what's happening at all. Others are in households where people are addicted to the 24-hour news cycle, and so they're saturated with stress and fear and anxiety right now. And so talking with students and families around when it's appropriate each day to kind of tune that out and put some boundaries around it, because they can look and find reliable information through the CDC, et cetera, but putting some boundaries around the amount of time spent focusing on COVID-19. The next step is to check in each day or each time we talk with our students about how they're feeling, and not avoiding the conversation, but even asking them, what do you know about what's going on right now? What do you think about it? How are you feeling? And when students share with us how they're feeling, let's not try to fix those feelings or dismiss them or minimize them. If a student says, I'm afraid right now, we don't have to say, oh, there's nothing to fear. We can say, okay, it's perfectly natural to feel afraid right now. What are some things that help you when you're feeling afraid? Here's some things you might want to try. So we actually talk to them about their feelings and provide some helpful guidance on ways to handle big emotions. Even incorporating some regulation activities into our instruction or the things we send home. I also have some resources for families impacted by grief and loss, by the way, that is on the Google Doc for families that are experiencing loss during this time. Then the next piece is to really build that sense of resilience, trying to also focus on the good that is happening right now, drawing attention to all of the people that are our healthcare providers, our essential workers at the grocery store, delivering food, caring for people, Meals on Wheels, doctors, nurses, social workers that are doing good work right now and helping our students to see all of the people that are helping to care for others during this time. And the last piece is inviting our students to think about, even if it's something small, even if it's something that they do in their home, what's one thing they could do right now to stay safe and help others? Because resilience, my version of resilience or my definition of resilience is that we have someone to walk with and we have someone to walk with and we have somewhere to walk to. In other words, we have connection and relationship, but we also have hope, possibility, a sense of purpose, a future that we're living into. And so recognizing that we provide that support and connection, but we also help to empower them and think about one small way they could help right now so that they have a sense of possibility, of agency, of hope, of empowerment during this time, which helps to alleviate that fear and that insecurity, knowing that in this they matter, in this they can do even some small thing at home to care for themselves and other people during this time. As we close, I want to highlight some additional resources. Again, the Google Doc can be found at Teach for Trust up at the top of the screen. Even if you don't have a Twitter account, it is pinned as the top tweet with a list of additional resources. I'm going to close with a few things. One is the SAMHSA Disaster Distress Hotline for folks experiencing emotional crisis or distress related to natural disasters and pandemics. Another is obviously in the event of an emergency, call 911, see if your district has any offerings through its employee assistance program. During this time, there is an uptick in folks struggling with substance use. And so recognize that a lot of recovery communities are providing online meetings. I personally attend adult children of alcoholics meetings, which are open to anyone who is recovering from childhood trauma. So recognize that even if you don't have alcoholism in your family history, those meetings welcome you, because this is a time where isolation can evoke a lot of feelings and memories that are connected to experiences of childhood trauma or adversity. So know that we are here for you and that there are a number of online recovery communities that are offering virtual options. The other thing is that there's also an uptick right now in domestic violence, which may be impacting both the families we serve, our own families, our colleagues. And so there's the National Domestic Violence Hotline, the National Suicide Prevention Hotline. The Child Mind Institute has a wealth of resources for parents and families right now on supporting parent and child mental health during shelter in place. I also have some resources on the Google Doc that are specific to supporting English language learners and special education students during this time. So please check out the Google Doc, as well as resources and conversations around equity, culturally responsive teaching, and social emotional supports during shelter in place. Because again, we just had a brief period of time, but I wanted to include those resources. Lastly, the Trevor Project, we have to recognize that our LGBTQ plus youth, especially those right now who are living with rejecting families. Family rejection is one of the highest, most contributing factors to suicidality among LGBTQ plus youth. So knowing that the Trevor Project hotline is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, if we need to share that with students who are LGBTQ plus and are struggling or considering suicide. And finally, as I close, I want to close with this quote from Mr. Rogers. When I was a boy, and I would see scary things in the news, my mother would say to me, look for the helpers. You will always find people who are helping. To this day, and especially in times of disaster, I remember my mother's words, and I am always comforted by realizing that there are still so many helpers, so many caring people in this world. You are those helpers. You are those caring people in this world. I thank you so much for the support you are providing to so many children and families. Thank you. And please keep in touch. If you have any questions, you can contact me via Twitter or via my email. We also have a website with additional information related to the book and the work that Amber and Victoria and I do. You can also contact Corwin directly. But thank you for your time today. Please continue to take care of yourself as you care for others. I thank you so much for taking this time to be with us today and in this conversation. This webinar will be recorded if you want to share it with colleagues. I appreciate your flexibility and your time and all that you are doing. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you so much, Ricky. This was an amazing webinar, and we've just been so gratified to see all of the participation and comments in the chat. So thank you, everybody, for joining us today. We hope you gained some helpful tips and practices from this webinar. We'll be sending out a link to the recorded version of this webinar via email shortly, so you should keep an eye on your email inbox tomorrow. That way you can watch the webinar again and share it with your colleagues and administrators if you'd like. If you'd like to dive deeper into some of these topics, because as Ricky mentioned, this is just really the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more that we could go into, but unfortunately we are out of time today. But if you would like to get more details, I highly recommend checking out Ricky's book, written with his co-authors Victoria Romero and Amber Warner. That book is available at Corwin.com and also in ebook versions at via Kindle and other retailers. If you are interested in diving deeper into this work with your staff, you can contact Corwin for options for having Ricky work directly with your team via virtual consulting sessions. Right now, Ricky is currently working virtually with several districts and organizations. So if you'd like more details, please email us at info@corwin.com, and we'd be happy to send you more information. We are also, for those who are not able to or for those who are looking for other opportunities to dive into this work, we are developing more virtual opportunities for individuals. So if you're not able to engage in this as a whole school or whole district training, then we are developing other opportunities for individuals. So please stay tuned for details in the next few weeks. Thank you so much for attending, and we appreciate everybody who is out there working with students and families in the community. Stay safe and stay healthy. Thank you so much.